The lunch rush at Bernie's diner hit like it always did, a tidal wave of hungry office workers and construction crews that turned a modest downtown establishment into controlled chaos between 11:30 and 1 o'clock every single weekday. Chen moved between the packed tables with practiced efficiency, her small frame navigating the narrow spaces with a dancer's precision, balancing plates of burgers and fries, while her mind kept track of orders, refills, and the growing list of tables that needed attention. She'd been working at Bernie's for 18 months now, ever since she'd dropped out of community college when her mother's medical bills started piling up, and in that time she'd learned to read the lunch crowd like a book, knowing exactly which customers would leave decent tips and which ones would stiff her after running her ragged with constant demands. The diner smelled like grease and coffee, and that particular mix of cleaning products and worn vinyl that every old restaurant seemed to have, and the constant clatter of plates and silverware mixed with conversations created a wall of sound that Maya had learned to work through like white noise. She'd just delivered a stack of pancakes to table 7 when she noticed the man in the corner booth, the one who'd been sitting there for almost 40 minutes nursing a single cup of coffee and watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle with unease. He wasn't like the regular customers, not dressed in work clothes or the rumpled business casual of the local office drones, but in a suit that probably cost more than she made in 3 months, charcoal grey with subtle pinstripes, paired with a white shirt so crisp it looked like it had been pressed 5 minutes ago. His watch caught the light as he lifted his coffee cup, and even from across the room Maya could tell it was real, the kind of timepiece that showed up in magazine advertisements with price tags that had too many zeros. Something about the way he sat there, perfectly still, except for his eyes tracking her movements, set off alarm bells in her head, the same instinct that had kept her safe walking home late at night through neighborhoods where women alone learned to trust their gut. Bernie called out that order 12 was up, his gravelly voice cutting through the diner noise, and Maya grabbed the plates from the window, delivering them to a pair of construction workers who barely looked up from their phones as she set down their food. When she turned back toward the coffee station to start another pot, she found her path blocked by the man from the corner booth, standing so close she could smell his cologne, something expensive and woody, that was completely out of place in a diner that usually smelled like bacon grease and burnt coffee. "Excuse me," Maya said, trying to step around him, but he moved with her, not quite blocking her but making it clear he wanted her attention. "Maya," he said, reading her name tag, his voice smooth and confident in that way that came from years of people doing exactly what he wanted. "I have a business proposition for you." She looked up at him properly for the first time, taking in the sharp jawline, the perfectly styled dark hair with just a touch of gray at the temples, the kind of face that belonged on billboards or business magazine covers, and most notably the complete lack of hesitation in his eyes, the absolute certainty that whatever he was about to say, she would agree to. "I'm working," Maya said, trying to keep her voice steady, professional, the tone she used with handsy customers who needed to be reminded that friendly service didn't mean anything more than that. "This will only take a moment," he continued, as if she hadn't spoken, "and it could change your life." He pulled out a business card, black with silver lettering, and held it between 2 fingers like a magician about to perform a trick. "My name is Marcus Ashford. I'm the CEO of Ashford Industries, and I need you to pretend to be my wife for one evening." The noise of the diner seemed to fade into the background as Maya stared at him, her brain struggling to process what he'd just said, wondering if she'd misheard him over the clatter of plates and the hiss of the griddle. "Your wife," she repeated, the words feeling strange in her mouth, and Marcus nodded, completely serious, no trace of humor or embarrassment on his face. "One evening, 5 hours maximum, a family dinner at my parents' estate in Bellevue. You smile, make small talk, play the devoted spouse, and I'll pay you $1,000 cash." He said it like he was ordering lunch, casual and straightforward, as if propositioning strange waitresses to pose as his wife was just another Tuesday morning business transaction. Maya felt her face flush hot with anger, and something else, something that felt uncomfortably like shame, even though she'd done nothing wrong, as if being propositioned like this in her workplace somehow reflected on her character rather than his. "I'm not that kind of person," she said, her voice coming out sharper than intended, loud enough that a couple at the nearest table turned to look, their French fries forgotten as they tuned into the drama unfolding 3 feet away. Marcus held up his hands in a placating gesture, his expression shifting to something that might have been genuine concern or might have been well-practiced manipulation. Maya couldn't tell which. "I think you've misunderstood," he said quickly, lowering his voice. "This isn't anything inappropriate. It's literally just dinner with my family. My mother is convinced I'm dying alone and miserable and won't stop setting me up with her friends' daughters. I need to show up with someone to get her off my back for a few months." He made it sound so reasonable, so logical, as if hiring a complete stranger to lie to his family was just a practical solution to an annoying problem, and the worst part was that a tiny part of Maya's brain was already doing the math, calculating what $1,000 would mean for her mother's physical therapy bills, for the stack of past due notices shoved in her kitchen drawer, for the landlord who kept leaving increasingly threatening messages about the rent being 5 days late. "Find someone else," Maya said, stepping around him toward the coffee station, needing to put distance between them, needing to focus on something normal and mundane like brewing coffee instead of the insane conversation she'd just had. "I can't," Marcus said, following, not touching her but staying close enough that she couldn't ignore him. "I've been sitting here for an hour watching you work and you're perfect for this. You're exactly the type of woman my mother would believe I'd marry. Smart, hard-working, unpretentious, someone real instead of the trust fund socialites she keeps throwing at me." Maya spun to face him, coffee pot in hand like a weapon, and several customers were definitely watching now, the lunch rush entertainment taking an unexpected turn. "You've been watching me for an hour," she repeated, her voice ice cold, "and you think that makes this better? You think that makes you sound less like a complete For the first time since he'd approached her, Marcus looked genuinely uncomfortable, a crack in his smooth corporate facade, and he ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, disrupting it into something almost human. "When I say it like that it sounds terrible," he admitted, "but I promise this is a legitimate offer. I'm desperate. My mother's birthday dinner is tonight and I told her 3 weeks ago I was bringing someone and now I'm out of options, and you're my last hope." The vulnerability in his voice sounded real, but Maya had learned not to trust men who looked at her like she was a solution to their problems. She'd learned that lesson from her father walking out when the bills got too high, from her ex-boyfriend who'd borrowed money and vanished, from every customer who'd left his number on a receipt like she should be grateful for the attention. "Not interested," Maya said flatly, turning away from him to pour coffee for table 14, where an elderly couple sat waiting patiently, the only customers in the place who weren't watching the drama unfold. 2,000, Marcus said, and Maya's hand shook slightly as she poured, a few drops of coffee splashing onto the saucer. "I'm not negotiating," she said without turning around, "because I'm not doing it at any price. Now please leave before I have Bernie throw you out." Bernie was 72 and had a bad hip, so this was an empty threat, but Maya said it with enough conviction that Marcus finally seemed to get the message. She heard him sigh behind her, the sound of expensive shoes on worn linoleum, as he walked back to his booth, and when she risked a glance over her shoulder, she saw him sitting there, staring down at his phone with the defeated posture of a man whose plans had just completely fallen apart. Good, Maya thought viciously. Let him figure out his own problems instead of trying to buy his way out of them with money and charm and offers that sounded too good to be true because they absolutely were too good to be true. She delivered coffee to the elderly couple, who smiled at her warmly and said nothing about the scene they'd witnessed, and tried to focus on getting through the rest of her shift without thinking about $1,000 or $2,000, or the way Marcus Ashford had looked at her like she was exactly what he needed. The silence in the car was deafening, broken only by the sound of Maya's ragged breathing as she fought to control the tears threatening to spill over, and Marcus sat frozen, staring at her like he was seeing her for the first time, really seeing her instead of the convenient solution to his family problems. "You're right," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're absolutely right, and I'm an asshole. I turned you into exactly what my mother accused you of being by offering you money in the first place. I made you complicit in my deception, and then had the audacity to judge you for considering more money when I'm the one who set this whole thing in motion." He ran both hands through his hair, destroying the careful styling, and when he looked at her again his eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. "I told myself I was being clever, solving a problem efficient, but what I really did was find someone desperate enough to compromise their values for cash, and then used that desperation against them. Marcus continued, his words coming faster now, like a dam breaking. I saw you at the diner, working your ass off for tips that probably didn't even cover your bills, and instead of thinking about how I could help someone in a difficult situation, I thought about how I could use them, how I could turn your struggle into my convenience, and that makes me exactly the kind of person I always swore I'd never become. Maya wiped at her eyes, smudging her careful makeup, and something about Marcus's raw honesty made her own walls crumble completely. I wanted to say no, Maya admitted. When you first propositioned me, I wanted to throw my coffee in your face and tell you to go to hell, but I couldn't, because rent was due and my mother needed medication and I was so tired of being one emergency away from homelessness, and I hated myself for even considering it, for putting a price tag on my integrity. The rain that had been threatening all evening finally started, drops pattering on the windshield in an irregular rhythm, and Marcus started the car again, the wipers moving in hypnotic sweeps across the glass. I need to tell you something, he said, pulling back onto the road, driving slower than before like he was buying time, and I need you to not interrupt until I'm done, because if you interrupt I'll lose my nerve and this whole evening will have been for nothing. Maya nodded, something in his tone making her heart race, and Marcus took a deep breath before continuing. I didn't choose you randomly, he said, staring at the road ahead, not looking at her. I'd been coming to Bernie's diner for 3 weeks, sitting in different spots watching you work, learning your schedule, your habits, the way you treated customers, the way you handled difficult situations with grace and humor, even when you were clearly exhausted. His words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications Maya wasn't sure she wanted to examine, and she felt her breath catch in her throat. I watched you give your lunch to a homeless woman who came in asking for water, telling Bernie you'd already eaten, when I knew for a fact you'd worked a double shift and hadn't taken a break. Marcus continued, his voice getting rougher. I watched you stay late to help the night cook when he cut his hand, missing your bus and having to walk home in the rain. I watched you defend a teenage busboy when a customer was berating him for dropping a glass, putting yourself between them without hesitation even though you're half the customer's size. He finally looked at her, and the expression on his face made Maya's heart stop, because it wasn't the calculated look of a CEO making a business deal. It was raw and vulnerable and completely unguarded. I asked you to pretend to be my wife because I'd already spent 3 weeks imagining what it would be like if you actually were, Marcus said, each word deliberate and careful. I told myself it was about finding someone my mother would believe, someone outside my world, someone genuine. But the truth is, I wanted an excuse to spend time with you, to see if you were as incredible as you seemed from a distance, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I went about it in the worst possible way, turning something that could have been real into a transaction. Maya felt tears streaming down her face, not bothering to wipe them away, because how was she supposed to respond to that? How was she supposed to process the fact that the man sitting beside her had been watching her for weeks, had created this elaborate scheme not just to fool his mother but to spend time with her, had paid her to fake a relationship because he'd been too afraid or too proud or too something to just ask her out like a normal person. You're insane, Maya said, her voice breaking. You're absolutely insane. You could have just introduced yourself, you could have asked me to coffee, you could have done literally anything other than offer me money to lie to your family. Marcus laughed, the sound bitter and self-deprecating, and he pulled into the parking lot of Maya's building, the security light casting harsh shadows across his face. I know, and I have no excuse except that I've spent my entire life solving problems with money and power and strategy. I've forgotten how to just be a normal person who asks someone out and risks rejection. I've built walls so high around myself that I can't figure out how to let anyone in without turning it into some kind of business arrangement. They sat in the parking lot with the rain drumming on the roof of the Tesla, the silence between them, no longer uncomfortable but charged with something else, something that felt like potential, like standing on the edge of a cliff and deciding whether to jump. What happens now? Maya asked finally, her voice small, and Marcus turned off the engine, the sudden quiet making every sound seem louder, her breathing, his, the rain, the distant sound of traffic on the main road. That depends on you, Marcus said, reaching into his jacket and pulling out an envelope, thick with cash that Maya knew represented either 4,000 or 2,000 depending on whether Catherine's test had been considered passed or failed. This is yours regardless of what you decide next. You earned it. You were perfect tonight. You handled my mother with more grace than anyone I've ever brought home. Emma loved you. Even my father noticed you, which is more engagement than he's shown in years. He held out the envelope, but Maya didn't take it immediately, staring at it like it might bite her, because taking that money would make everything that had happened tonight real in a way it hadn't been while they were performing. It would confirm that she'd sold herself even if only for an evening, that she'd compromised her values for cash. Take it, Marcus said gently. Please, you don't have to feel guilty about needing money. There's no shame in accepting help. You wouldn't judge someone else in your position for taking this, so don't judge yourself. Maya took the envelope, sliding it into her clutch without counting it, trusting that whatever was in there, Marcus had deemed appropriate, and the weight of it felt both lighter and heavier than she'd expected. Now tell me what you want, Marcus continued, his voice dropping lower, more intimate. Not what you think you should want, not what makes sense or what's practical, but what you actually want, because I've spent this whole evening watching you smile and laugh and handle my family with grace and intelligence, and all I could think about was how much I wanted it to be real, how much I wanted to actually be the man who got to hold your hand and look at you like you hung the moon and know that when the night ended, we'd go home together instead of me dropping you off and going back to my empty apartment alone. Maya's heart was racing, her pulse loud in her ear, and she knew what she wanted, had known since sometime during dinner when Marcus had squeezed her hand under the table and looked at her with an expression that was too real to be acting, but wanting something and allowing yourself to have it were two very different things. I want, Maya started, then stopped, the words sticking in her throat, because this was terrifying. This was more vulnerable than anything she'd done all night, more honest than any truth she'd told. I want to see what happens if we start over. If we pretend tonight never happened, and you walk into the diner tomorrow and ask me out like a normal person, no money, no schemes, no performances, just you and me figuring out if there's something real underneath all the pretense. Marcus's face transformed, hope and relief and something that looked like joy breaking through the careful control he'd maintained all evening, and he reached for her hand, holding it gently like it was something precious. I can do that, he said. I can absolutely do that. I'll come in tomorrow during your lunch shift and order coffee, and we'll flirt awkwardly, and I'll leave you an embarrassingly large tip that you'll probably try to give back, and then I'll ask if you'd like to get dinner sometime and you'll say yes, and we'll go somewhere nice but not too fancy, because I'll be trying not to overwhelm you with money, and it will be terrible and awkward and perfect. Maya laughed, the sound wet with tears but genuine, and she squeezed his hand back. That sounds terrible, she agreed. I can't wait. They sat there for another moment, neither wanting to break the spell, and then Marcus walked her to her building door, the rain soaking through his expensive suit while Maya huddled under his jacket that he'd insisted she wear. Thank you, Maya said at the door, not sure what she was thanking him for exactly, the money, the honesty, the chance at something real, maybe all of it, and Marcus smiled, that vulnerable expression still on his face that made him look younger, less polished, more human. Thank you, he countered, for giving me a chance I didn't deserve, for calling me out on my bullshit, for being exactly as incredible as I thought you were. I'll see you tomorrow at Burning. He left her there in the doorway, walking back to his car through the rain, and Maya watched him go, the envelope of cash heavy in her clutch, her heart lighter than it had been in months. She climbed the stairs to her apartment, unlocked the door, dropped her bags on the floor, and immediately opened the envelope, needing to know, and found $6,000 in neat bills, $5,400 more than they'd agreed on, with a note in Marcus's handwriting that simply said, for your mother's medical bills, not payment, just help from someone who wants to help. Maya sat on her bed still wearing the emerald dress and Marcus's jacket, staring at the money and the note, and she cried, not from sadness or shame, but from relief and hope and the strange realization that sometimes the most unexpected moments could change everything, that sometimes accepting help wasn't weakness but wisdom, that sometimes the person you met in the strangest circumstances could turn out to be exactly what you needed, even if you'd never known to look for them. The next day Marcus walked into Bernie's diner, at exactly noon, ordered coffee, and when Maya came to take his order he looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time, which in a way he was, without the weight of schemes and lies between them. "I'm Marcus," he said, offering his hand across the counter, "and I know this is probably weird since I'm just a customer, but I was wondering if you'd like to have dinner with me sometime somewhere that's not here, somewhere we could actually talk without you having to work." Maya pretended to think about it, biting back a smile, remembering Catherine's suspicious eyes, and Emma's warm approval and the feeling of Marcus's hand in hers, under the dinner table, all of it real now in a way it hadn't been before. "I'm Maya," she said, shaking his hand, "and yes, I'd like that a lot." 6 months later they'd tell people they met at the diner, which was technically true even if the full story was more complicated. And a year after that, when Marcus proposed for real and Maya said yes and they started planning an actual wedding, Emma would pull Maya aside and admit she'd known something was off that first dinner, but had chosen not to say anything because she could see the way her brother looked at Maya, like she was something precious he'd been searching for without knowing it, and Maya would never tell Catherine about the original arrangement, would never confirm or deny the older woman's suspicions, would simply continue to be herself, genuine and hard-working and exactly the kind of person Marcus needed in his life, someone who kept him grounded and called him out when necessary and loved him not for his money or his status, but for who he was underneath all the expensive suits and corporate polish. The money Marcus had given her that first night paid for her mother's medical bills and allowed Maya to finish her degree while working part-time, and eventually she did open her own restaurant, a small place that focused on quality and treated staff well and made customers feel valued. And Marcus was there for the opening, wearing jeans and a t-shirt, and looking more proud than he ever had, closing a multi-million-dollar business deal, because this was real, this was there, this was what happened when two people stopped performing and started being honest about what they wanted and needed from each other. Maya's shift ended at 3 o'clock, and she walked the 6 blocks to her apartment, through the September drizzle that had started halfway through the afternoon, soaking through her thin jacket. Before she'd made it 2 blocks, her feet ached in her worn sneakers, the ones she kept meaning to replace, but never quite had the money for, and her mind kept circling back to Marcus Ashford, despite her best efforts to forget the entire bizarre encounter. The business card he'd left on the counter before he'd finally given up and left burned in her pocket, like it was physically hot. Black cardstock with silver lettering that probably cost more per card than she made per hour, and she'd picked it up without really thinking about it, telling herself she was just curious, just wanted to make sure he was who he claimed to be, and not some con artist or worse. Her apartment was a studio in a building that had been old when her grandmother was young, 1 room with a kitchenette in the corner, and a bathroom so small she had to close the door to sit on the toilet, but it was hers and it was affordable, and it was walking distance from both the diner and the physical therapy clinic where her mother did her sessions 3 times a week. She dropped her bag on the floor, kicked off her shoes and went straight to her laptop, the ancient MacBook she'd bought used 5 years ago and had been nursing along ever since, its battery held together with duct tape and hope. Marcus Ashford CEO, she typed into Google, hitting enter before she could talk herself out of it, and the results loaded immediately, pages and pages of them. The first hit was the Ashford Industries website, a sleek corporate page with Marcus's photo front and center, the same sharp jaw and confident eyes she'd seen in the diner, but more formal, more polished, posed in what was probably a corner office with Seattle's skyline behind him. Ashford Industries specialized in sustainable technology solutions, whatever that meant, with offices in 12 countries and annual revenue in the billions, with a B, and Marcus himself had taken over as CEO 3 years ago when his father retired, making headlines for being the youngest person to lead the company in its 50-year history. Maya clicked through to the news section, finding article after article about corporate acquisitions and technology partnerships and charity galas. Marcus photographed in tuxedos and business suits, always alone or with business associates, never with a date or a wife or anyone who looked like they might be more than professional acquaintances. She found his social media profiles next, all of them carefully curated corporate accounts with the occasional personal post that felt staged and artificial, photos of hiking trips and coffee shops that looked like they'd been approved by a marketing team before posting. There were comments from women on every post, hundreds of them, heart emojis and flirtatious messages and outright proposals, and Maya felt a strange twist in her stomach looking at them, Not quite jealousy, but something adjacent, maybe just the stark reminder of how completely out of her league this entire situation was. She searched for Ashford family next, finding society page articles about his parents, Richard and Catherine Ashford, photos of them at fundraisers and art gallery openings, his mother wearing jewelry that probably cost more than Maya's entire building. There was a mention of a younger sister, Emma, who ran a non-profit focused on education access, and older articles about the family's rise from a small engineering firm to a technology empire, the classic American success story wrapped in expensive suits and political donations. Nothing Maya found suggested Marcus was dangerous or running a scam. Everything pointed to exactly what he'd claimed to be, a wealthy CEO with family problems he was trying to solve with money, but that somehow made it worse, made the offer more real and therefore more tempting. She closed her laptop and stared at the wall where her mother's physical therapy bills were tacked up in a neat row, color-coded by due date, the red notices increasing in frequency. $2,000 would clear almost half of them, would buy her breathing room for the first time in months, would mean she could fix the leaking faucet in her bathroom and maybe replace her work shoes and not feel her stomach drop every time her phone rang because it might be a debt collector. Maya picked up Marcus's business card again, running her thumb over the embossed lettering, and before she could overthink it, she grabbed her phone and typed out a message to the number printed beneath his name. They met at a coffee shop in Capitol Hill the next morning, neutral territory that Marcus had suggested when he'd responded to her text within minutes, his message professionally brief and perfectly punctuated, like he was dictating to an assistant. Maya had agonized over what to wear, finally settling on her only pair of jeans without holes, and a sweater her mother had given her last Christmas, wanting to look put together, but not like she was trying too hard, though she suspected Marcus's idea of casual probably still cost more than her monthly rent. He was already there when she arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 coffee cups in front of him, and he stood when he saw her, that ingrained politeness that came from expensive private schools and etiquette lessons. "I wasn't sure how you took your coffee," he said, gesturing to the cups, "so I got one black and one with cream and sugar. Take whichever you prefer." Maya chose the one with cream and sugar, wrapping her hands around the warm cup and using the moment to study him in better light, without the chaos of the diner between them. He looked tired, she realized, the kind of exhaustion that came from too many late nights and too much stress, and there was something almost vulnerable about seeing him in jeans and a simple button-down instead of that intimidating suit. "Thank you for meeting me," Marcus said, sitting back down and pulling out a folder from the messenger bag beside his chair. "I want to apologize for yesterday. I handled that terribly. I was desperate and I made you uncomfortable, and I'm sorry." The apology sounded genuine, and Maya found herself relaxing slightly, her death grip on the coffee cup loosening. "Why me?" she asked, the question that had kept her up most of the night. "You're rich, you're good-looking, you could find someone to do this in about 5 minutes on any dating app, so why walk into a random diner and proposition a waitress you've never met?" Marcus smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes, and he stared down at his coffee like he might find answers in the dark liquid. "Because everyone I know is connected to my world somehow," he said quietly. "Business associates, society friends, women my mother has already met or heard about. I can't show up with any of them, because she'll know their families or their backgrounds, or she'll spend the whole evening analyzing whether they're suitable instead of just backing off and giving me space." He looked up at Maya then, and she saw something raw in his expression, something that reminded her of how she felt every time she had to call her mother and explain why she couldn't afford both groceries and the electric bill that month. "I need someone completely outside that world, someone real, someone my mother will look at and think I've finally found something genuine instead of just another strategic alliance disguised as a relationship." Maya sipped her coffee, thinking about the medical bills on her wall, about the text she'd gotten that morning from her landlord about the rent, about the way her manager at the diner had pulled her aside yesterday to quietly suggest she might want to pick up some extra shifts if she could. "Tell me exactly what this would involve," she said, and Marcus's face brightened with hope. He opened the folder and pulled out several typed pages, sliding them across the table, and Maya saw they were formatted like a contract, complete with legal jargon and signature lines. 5 hours maximum, from 6 to 11 tonight, dinner at my parents' estate in Bellevue. You'll be introduced as my girlfriend. We'll eat dinner, make small talk with my parents and sister, And then we leave, Marcus explained, his finger tracking down the page as he outlined each point. I'll provide appropriate clothing if you need it, transportation there and back, a basic background story we'll both stick to about how we met, and $2,000 in cash when I drop you home at the end of the evening. He pulled another sheet from the fold, this one showing a simple backstory, names and dates, and details about a fictional relationship that had apparently started 6 months ago at a coffee shop, because of course it had. That was exactly the kind of meet-cute story that wealthy families would find charming. I'll need you to memorize this, Marcus said, and I'll need to know some real things about you so I can answer basic questions naturally if they come up. Nothing too personal, just the broad strokes of your life. Maya read through the contract slowly, looking for the hidden clause that would turn this from an unusual business transaction into something dangerous, but it was straightforward, almost boring in its specificity, outlining exactly what she would and wouldn't be required to do, including several clauses explicitly stating that nothing physical or romantic was expected or permitted beyond hand-holding and possibly a brief kiss on the cheek if the situation called for. Marcus had insisted on taking her shopping, despite Maya's protests that she had a perfectly acceptable dress at home, the black one she'd worn to her cousin's wedding 2 years ago that still fit if she didn't breathe too deeply. My mother will notice every detail, he'd explained as they drove across the city in his Tesla, the car so quiet and smooth that Maya felt like she was floating. She'll catalogue your clothes, your jewelry, your shoes, your handbag, and she'll make judgments based on all of it. We need you to look like someone I would actually date, which means someone who has access to quality clothing, even if she doesn't buy it herself, someone I might have bought gifts for over 6 months of dating. The boutique he took her to didn't have prices visible anywhere, which Maya had learned was always a bad sign, the kind of place where if you had to ask you couldn't afford it, and the woman who greeted them at the door recognized Marcus immediately, her professionally friendly expression warming into something more genuine as she air-kissed both his cheeks. Marcus, darling, it's been months, your mother was just in here last week. She bought the most stunning Valentino piece, the woman said, then turned her attention to Maya with the assessing gaze of someone who could calculate your net worth from your shoes alone. And who is this lovely creature? Marcus put his hand on the small of Maya's back, the touch light but proprietary, and Maya had to resist the urge to step away from it. This is Maya, my girlfriend. We have a dinner tonight and she needs something appropriate, something elegant but not too formal, something that says she's confident and comfortable but not trying too hard. He said it so naturally, like he bought clothes for girlfriends all the time, like this was just a normal couple doing normal couple things, and the boutique owner bought it completely, her expression shifting to delighted conspiracy. Oh, how wonderful. I have several pieces that would be perfect. Come with me, darling, she said, taking Maya's hand and leading her deeper into the store, and Maya shot Marcus a panicked look over her shoulder that he either didn't see or chose to ignore. The next hour was a blur of being dressed and undressed like a doll, the boutique owner, whose name was apparently Simone, bringing dress after dress for Maya to try on, each one more expensive and intimidating than the last. She tried on a red cocktail dress that made her feel like she was playing dress-up in her mother's closet, a navy sheath that was somehow both professional and sexy, a cream-colored piece with intricate beading that probably cost more than her car before it had died and been sold for scrap. The emerald, Simone announced after the 7th or 8th dress. Yes, that's the one. Marcus, come look. Maya stepped out of the dressing room feeling absurdly self-conscious, the emerald green dress hugging her curves in ways her waitress uniform never had, the neckline modest but somehow still suggesting things, the length hitting just above her knee in that perfect sweet spot between sophisticated and flirtation. Marcus looked up from his phone and went very still, his expression unreadable, and for a long moment he just stared at her while Maya fought the urge to run back into the dressing room and hide. That's perfect, he said finally, his voice slightly rougher than it had been. That's exactly right, we'll take it. Simone beamed and disappeared to wrap up the dress, and Maya stood frozen in front of the mirror, staring at a version of herself she didn't quite recognize, someone polished and elegant and completely out of her element. You clean up nice, Marcus said, coming to stand beside her, meeting her eyes in the mirror, and there was something in his expression that made Maya's stomach flutter in a way that had nothing to do with nerves about the dinner. This is insane, Maya said quietly. I'm a waitress pretending to be someone I'm not so you can lie to your family. This is absolutely insane. Marcus smiled, but it was sad around the edges, and he adjusted his watch in that nervous gesture. Maya was starting to recognize. Welcome to my entire life, he said. Nothing but performance and pretense and everyone lying to everyone else about what they really want. At least with you it's honest dishonesty. We both know exactly what this is. Maya changed back into her regular clothes, carefully hanging the emerald dress in the garment bag Simone provided, and tried not to think about the fact that Marcus had also insisted on buying her shoes and a handbag and jewelry to complete the outfit, spending money on her in an hour that would have taken her 6 months to sell. They left the boutique with Maya carrying bags that felt both weightless and impossibly heavy, and Marcus checked his watch as they got back in the car. We have 4 hours before we need to leave, he said. I should probably teach you how to be. Marcus's apartment was exactly what Maya had expected, and nothing like she'd imagined at the same time. A penthouse in one of those glass towers downtown, with floor-to-ceiling windows that turned the entire city into wallpaper, the kind of view that people paid millions for just to wake up to every morning. The furniture was modern and minimalist, all clean lines and neutral colors, expensive without being showy, and there was art on the walls that Maya suspected was original, despite looking like something a child could have painted in kindergarten. This is where you explain that my dress is from Target, and my shoes are from Payless, and your mother is going to see through this in about 30 seconds, Maya said, setting her bags down by the door, and feeling completely out of place in her worn jeans and sweater. Marcus shook his head, already moving toward the kitchen, which was all marble countertops and professional-grade appliances that probably had never been used for anything more complicated than reheating takeout. My mother won't care where your clothes came from you met me, he explained, pulling out a bottle of wine from a rack that held at least 50 bottles. She'll assume I bought you new things, which is exactly what a man in my position would do for someone he was serious about. The clothes aren't about fooling her, they're about making you feel confident enough to sell the performance. He poured 2 glasses of wine, red and probably expensive judging by how carefully he handled the bottle, and handed one to Maya before gesturing toward the couch. Sit, he said, and when she raised an eyebrow at the command he smiled slightly. Please, sit, we need to go over the basics before tonight. There are things you need to know about my family, and things I need to know about you, and we have approximately 3 hours to become a couple who've been together for 6 months. Maya sat, sinking into a couch that probably cost more than her yearly salary, and took a sip of wine that tasted like nothing she'd ever had before, smooth and complex with flavors she couldn't begin to identify. Tell me about your mother, she said, because if she was going to lie to this woman's face, she at least wanted to understand who she was lying to. Marcus sat in the chair across from her, his expression shifting into something more guarded, and he swirled his wine slowly before answering. Catherine Marie Ashford, 62 years old, former fashion designer who retired when she married my father, currently serves on the boards of 3 charitable foundations, and runs the Ashford Family Trust, which manages our philanthropic giving. He recited like he was reading from a biography. She's intelligent, perceptive, ruthlessly judgmental, and convinced that everyone she meets is either trying to use our family for money or social status, which to be fair is usually accurate. He took a long drink of his wine and continued, his voice taking on an edge that suggested years of complicated history. She's been trying to control every aspect of my life since I took over the company, setting me up with daughters of her friend, inviting women to family dinners without telling me, making pointed comments about continuing the family legacy, and giving her grandchildren before she's too old to enjoy them, and I'm tired of being treated like a prize stud at a horse auction instead of a human being with my own preferences and timeline. The bitterness in his voice was raw and real, and Maya found herself sympathizing despite the absurdity of feeling bad for a billionaire. What about your father, she asked, and Marcus's expression softened slightly. My father is basically a non-entity at family gatherings. He'll shake your hand, ask you one polite question about your job, and then spend the rest of the evening in his study reading. He checked out of family management years ago and leaves everything to my mother, Marcus explained, and my sister Emma will either love you immediately or see through this entire charade in 5 minutes. I genuinely can't predict which. She's perceptive, but she also wants me to be happy. So there's a chance she'll play along even if she suspects something is off. They spent the next 2 hours building their fictional relationship, crafting a story about meeting at a coffee shop near the diner where Maya had been on her break, Marcus stopping in for an espresso between their eyes meeting over the cream and sugar station in a moment of perfect rom-com timing. They'd talked, exchanged numbers, gone on a first date to a small Italian restaurant in Fremont. Nothing fancy, because Marcus wanted to see if she'd like him without the money being a fact. They'd been taking it slow, seeing each other when their schedules allowed, which wasn't often given Maya's work schedule and Marcus's travel for business. But they were serious about each other, serious enough that Marcus was ready to introduce her to his family. The Ashford estate sat on 5 acres of waterfront property in Bellevue, hidden behind walls and gates, and security systems that probably cost more than most people's houses, and as Marcus's Tesla whispered up the long driveway, Maya felt her carefully constructed confidence begin to crack around the edges. The house itself was colonial style, all white columns and symmetrical windows, the kind of place that showed up in architecture magazines with captions about timeless elegance and old money. And there were already 3 other cars parked in the circular driveway, expensive machines that gleamed under the landscape lighting like predators waiting to pounce. "Breathe," Marcus said quietly, reaching over to take her hand, his palm warm and dry against her clammy one. "You look perfect, you know your story, you're going to be fine. Just remember that you're doing me a favor, and they should be grateful I found someone as genuine as you instead of another social climber looking for a meal ticket." Maya squeezed his hand back, drawing strength from the contact, and tried to channel the confidence she'd felt in the boutique earlier, when the dress had made her feel like someone who belonged in places like this. "If this goes badly, if your mother figures it out or I mess something up, I'm keeping the money," she said, only half joking, and Marcus laughed, the sound breaking through some of the tension that had been building in the car. "Deal," he agreed, "and if it goes well, if we pull this off, and my mother actually believes we're together, I'll double it. 4,000 instead of 2, because that will be worth every penny, just to see the look on her face when she realizes she can stop her matchmaking campaign." They got out of the car, and Marcus came around to offer his arm, a gesture that felt both old-fashioned and natural, and Maya took it, letting him guide her toward the front door, which opened before they'd even reached the steps. A woman stood in the doorway, backlit by the warm light from inside, tall and elegant in a way that made Maya immediately understand where Marcus got his looks. Her dark hair pulled back in a classic chignon, her dress simple but undoubtedly designer, and her eyes sharp as knives as they took in every detail of Maya's appearance in approximately 2 seconds. "Marcus, darling, you're late," Catherine Ashford said, her voice carrying that particular blend of affection and criticism that mothers had perfected over generations. "We've been waiting for almost 20 minutes. Your father has already had 2 drinks and you know how he gets." She stepped forward to embrace her son, the kind of careful hug that avoided messing up hair or makeup, and then turned her full attention to Maya, her smile polite but not quite reaching her eye. "And you must be Maya. Marcus has told us so much about you. Well, relatively speaking, he's been rather secretive about this whole relationship, which of course makes me terribly curious." Maya felt Marcus's hand tighten slightly on her arm, a silent message of support, and she summoned her best customer service smile, the one she used at the diner for difficult tables. "Mrs. Ashford, it's lovely to meet you. Thank you so much for inviting me. Your home is absolutely beautiful," she said, keeping her voice warm but not gushing, friendly but not desperate, hitting that sweet spot between polite and genuine that she'd learned from years of dealing with customers who could make or break her tips with a single judgment. Catherine's smile warmed fractionally, the first test apparently passed, and she stepped aside to let them enter. The interior of the house was exactly what Maya had expected, all hardwood floors and antique furniture and artwork that belonged in museums, but it was also somehow lived in. There were books stacked on side tables, and photos covering the mantel, and a dog bed in the corner where a golden retriever was sleeping peacefully despite the arrival of guests. "Everyone's in the dining room. We're having cocktails before dinner. I hope you like seafood because the chef has prepared his signature Dungeness crab bisque," Catherine said, leading them through the house, her heels clicking on the hardwood with metronomic precision. They entered the dining room and Maya's breath caught slightly. The space was stunning, 2-story ceiling with a chandelier that looked like it had been salvaged from a French palace, a table that could easily seat 20 set for 6 with china, and crystal that probably had its own insurance policy. 3 people stood near the windows, drinks in hand, and they all turned as Marcus and Maya entered. Richard Ashford was exactly as Marcus had described, tall and distinguished with silver hair and a kind of weathered handsomeness that came from good genes and better skin care. He offered Maya a polite handshake and a warm smile before immediately excusing himself to refill his drink, clearly following the script of minimal family engagement that Marcus had outlined. The younger woman, Emma, was striking in a completely different way than her mother, with dark curly hair left loose and wild, wearing jeans and a silk blouse to her mother's formal dress, and her eyes were sharp with intelligence as she looked Maya up and down with undisguised curiosity. "So you're the mystery woman," Emma said, bypassing handshakes entirely to pull Maya into a hug that felt genuinely warm. "I've been dying to meet you ever since Marcus accidentally let it slip that he was seeing someone, which was approximately 6 weeks ago, because my brother is terrible at keeping secrets from me, even when he thinks he's being subtle." Marcus shot his sister a look that was equal parts affection and warning, and Maya felt a spike of panic. The timeline was wrong. They'd said 6 months, not 6 weeks. But before she could figure out how to address the discrepancy, Emma was already moving on, linking her arm through Maya's, and pulling her toward the windows. "Tell me everything. How did you two meet? What do you do? Are you aware that my brother once cried during a viewing of The Notebook? I feel like that's information you should have before committing to anything serious." Emma, her rapid-fire questions delivered with a smile that suggested she was testing Maya's ability to keep up rather than actually grilling her. Maya glanced at Marcus, who was being intercepted by his mother, giving Maya a subtle nod that she interpreted as "go ahead, stick to the story," and she took a breath before launching into their carefully crafted lie. "We met at a coffee shop actually, completely random. I was on my break from work and he was between meetings. We reached for the cream at the same time and ended up talking for 20 minutes about nothing and everything," Maya said, surprised by how easily the words came, how natural it felt to smile while describing a meeting that had never happened. "I'm a waitress at a diner downtown, which I'm sure is not what anyone expected, but Marcus said he liked that I was real, that I didn't know who he was or care about his money." Emma's expression shifted slightly, something that might have been approval or might have been calculation. Maya couldn't quite read it. "A waitress," Emma repeated, not judgmental but thoughtful. "That must be hard work, long hours, difficult customers. I did a stint waiting tables during college and it nearly broke me. Lasted exactly 3 weeks before I admitted defeat and took a nice air-conditioned office job at one of Dad's subsidiaries." She said it with self-deprecating humor, acknowledging her privilege without apologizing for it, and Maya found herself liking Marcus's sister despite the circumstance. "It has its moments," Maya said carefully, "but it pays the bills, and the regular customers are mostly nice. Plus it's given me pretty good skills at reading people and handling difficult situations, which honestly has come in handy in more areas of life than you'd expect." Emma laughed, a genuine sound that made her whole face light up, and Maya felt some of her tension ease. Maybe this wouldn't be a complete disaster. Maybe she could actually pull this off. Dinner was announced and they moved to the table, Catherine orchestrating the seating with the precision of a general deploying troops, placing Maya between Marcus and Richard, with Emma across from her and Catherine at the head, close enough to observe every interaction. The first course arrived, the promised crab bisque served in delicate bowls by staff who moved like ghosts, silent and efficient, and Maya picked up her spoon carefully, aware that Catherine was watching her handle the silverware, judging her table manners against some invisible standard of acceptable behavior. The bisque was incredible, rich and buttery with chunks of sweet crab meat that practically melted on Maya's tongue, but she barely tasted it, too focused on maintaining her composure while Catherine launched into what felt like an interrogation disguised as polite dinner conversation. "So Maya, tell us about your family. Where did you grow up? Do your parents still live in the area?" Catherine asked, her tone friendly but her eyes calculating, and Maya recognized the tactic immediately. It was the same way difficult customers at the diner would start with simple questions before working up to complaints, establishing a baseline before going in for the kill. "I grew up in Tacoma. My mother still lives there. My father left when I was 12, Maya said, deciding that staying as close to the truth as possible would make the lies easier to maintain. "Mum worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat. She was a teacher's aide during the day and cleaned offices at night. She taught me that honest work is nothing to be ashamed of regardless of what it is." She saw Catherine's expression flicker, something that might have been respect or might have been pity, but before the older woman could respond, Emma jumped in. "What about education? Did you go to college?" Emma asked, and Maya appreciated the save even though the question itself was still dangerous territory. "I did 2 years at community college, studying business administration, but I had to drop out when my mom got sick. She needed physical therapy after a car accident, and the insurance didn't cover everything, so I picked up extra shifts and put school on hold," Maya explained, and this was true, all of it painfully true, and she saw Marcus's hand tighten around his wine glass beside her, muscle ticking in his jaw. "That's very admirable," Richard said from her other side, speaking up for the first time since they'd sat down. "Family should come first. Too many young people today prioritize career over the people who matter most. I respect your choice even though I'm sure it wasn't easy." His voice was kind, genuinely warm, and Maya felt tears prick at her eyes unexpectedly, the simple validation of her sacrifice hitting harder than she'd anticipated. Marcus's hand found hers under the table, squeezing gently, the touch grounding her, reminding her that she was playing a role, that she couldn't afford to get emotional and blow their cover. "Marcus tells us, you two have been quite serious despite the short time you've been together," Catherine said, her emphasis on short time making it clear she had opinions about the pace of their relationship. "He's even mentioned potentially introducing you to some of his business associates, which is quite significant given how private he usually is about his personal life." Maya felt Marcus tense beside her. This was apparently news to him too, and she realized with growing horror that Catherine was testing them, throwing out false information to see how they'd react, trying to catch them in a lie or an inconsistency. "We're taking things one day at a time," Maya said carefully. "Marcus's work is demanding, and my schedule is unpredictable, but we make time for each other when we can. Quality over quantity has always been more important to both of us than rushing into anything before we're ready." It was a non-answer, the kind of vague statement that could mean anything, and she saw Catherine's eyes narrow slightly, unsatisfied but unable to pin down exactly why. The main course arrived, filet mignon with roasted vegetables and some kind of potato dish that probably had a French name Maya wouldn't be able to pronounce, and the conversation shifted to safer topics. Emma telling a story about a disaster at her non-profit involving a celebrity donor and a misunderstanding about event location. Richard asking Marcus about a business deal that was apparently in the works. Catherine interjecting with comments and corrections that suggested she knew more about the company than she let on. Maya ate slowly, contributing when spoken to directly but mostly observing the family dynamics, the way Emma and Marcus communicated in looks and half-finished sentences, the way Catherine dominated every conversation while pretending not to, the way Richard had perfected the art of being present without actually engaging. "Tell me, Maya," Catherine said during a lull in the conversation, her voice taking on that deceptively casual tone that Maya had learned to fear. "What are your long-term goals? Surely you don't plan to wait tables forever. What do you see for your future?" The question hung in the air like a trap, and Maya knew whatever answer she gave would be wrong. Too ambitious would suggest she was a gold digger looking to use Marcus for advancement. Too modest would suggest she lacked drive and wouldn't be a suitable partner for a CEO. "I'd like to finish my degree eventually," Maya said slowly, "and I've always been interested in restaurant management, maybe opening my own place someday. Something small and focused on quality rather than quantity. A place where staff are treated well and customers feel like they're part of something special rather than just another transaction." She saw Marcus smile slightly, and Emma nodded with approval, but Catherine's expression remained neutral, unreadable. Maya excused herself between courses, needing a break from Catherine's relentless questioning and the weight of maintaining the performance, and Emma directed her to a bathroom down the hall that turned out to be larger than Maya's entire apartment. She locked the door and leaned against it, breathing deeply, staring at her reflection in the mirror that was framed with lights like a movie star's dressing room, and barely recognized the woman looking back at her, polished and elegant in the emerald dress with her hair styled and her makeup perfect, playing at being someone she wasn't in a house that cost more than she'd earn in 10 lifetimes. Her phone buzzed in the small clutch Marcus had insisted she carry, and she pulled it out to find a text from her mother asking how she was doing, completely unaware that her daughter was currently pretending to be a CEO's girlfriend at a mansion in Bellevue, and Maya felt the weight of all her lies pressing down on her chest like a physical thing. She was lying to Marcus's family, lying to her mother by omission, lying to herself about how okay she was with all of this, treating her dignity and her honesty like commodities that could be bought for $2,000 or $4,000 if she performed well enough, and the woman in the mirror looked disgusted with her. There was a soft knock on the door and Emma's voice filtered through, concerned and gentle. "Maya, you okay in there? You've been gone for almost 10 minutes, and Marcus is starting to look worried, which is actually kind of sweet because I've never seen him worried about anyone before." Maya splashed cold water on her face, careful not to smudge her makeup too badly, and opened the door to find Emma leaning against the wall with an expression that was far too knowing. "I'm fine, just needed a minute. Your mother is very intense," Maya said, and Emma laughed, pushing off the wall to stand closer. "My mother is terrifying. You don't have to be polite about it. She's reduced grown men to tears with nothing but a raised eyebrow and a disappointed sigh," Emma said. Then her expression turned serious, searching. "But that's not really what's bothering you, is it? You look like someone who's about to jump out of a plane without checking if the parachute works." Maya opened her mouth to deny it, to maintain the performance, but something about Emma's directness and the way she was looking at Maya without judgment made the lies stick in her throat. "This is all so far outside my world," Maya admitted quietly. "The house, the food, the way your family talks about money and travel and business, like it's all so normal and easy. I keep waiting for someone to point at me and yell that I don't belong here, that I'm a fraud playing dress-up in borrowed clothes." Emma's expression softened and she took Maya's hand, squeezing it with genuine warmth. "Can I tell you a secret?" Emma said, leaning in conspiratorial. "Everyone feels that way at these dinners, even the people who've been coming for years, even me sometimes, and I grew up in this house. My mother has this talent for making everyone feel like they're failing some invisible test she's never actually explained the rules for. It's not about you, it's about her need to control everything and everyone around her." They walked back toward the dining room together, and Emma kept talking, her voice low and urgent. "Marcus hasn't brought anyone home in 3 years, not since Julia, who was an absolute nightmare, a corporate lawyer who spent the entire evening talking about her partnership track and her portfolio, and barely acknowledged that Marcus was even in the room." Emma explained. "The fact that he brought you is holding your hand under the table and looking at you like you're the only person in the room, even when my mother is in full interrogation mode. That means something. That's real, regardless of how uncomfortable you feel about being here." Maya felt something twist in her chest, guilt and confusion, and something else she didn't want to examine too closely, because Emma didn't know this was all fake, didn't know that Marcus was paying Maya to be here, that every touch and look was part of a performance designed to get Catherine to back off her matchmaking crusade. "I really need to get back," Maya said, pulling away gently, and Emma let her go, but not before giving her one more searching look that suggested she saw more than Maya wanted her to. Dessert was already being served when they returned, some elaborate chocolate construction that probably required a degree in architecture to create, and Marcus looked up as Maya slid back into her chair, his eyes questioning, making sure she was okay. "Sorry, needed to freshen up," Maya said with a smile that felt brittle, and Marcus's hand found hers again under the table, his thumb rubbing gentle circles on her palm in a gesture that felt too intimate, too real for what they were supposed to be. "Maya and I were just getting to know each other," Emma announced cheerfully. "I approve, by the way. She's much better than Julia, who was about as warm as a corporate tax order." Marcus groaned, but he was smiling, and even Catherine's expression thawed slightly at Emma's enthusiasm, the first genuine warmth Maya had seen from her all evening. The dinner finally ended around 10:30, and Maya felt exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical tiredness, and everything to do with the emotional labor of maintaining a lie for 4.5 hours straight, smiling and laughing and pretending to be someone she wasn't, while Catherine Ashford studied her like a specimen under a microscope. Marcus made their excuses, claiming an early meeting the next morning that Maya suspected was invented, and they said their goodbyes, Emma hugging Maya tightly and whispering, "Don't let my mother intimidate you, you're good for him," before letting go, Richard shaking both their hands with genuine warmth, and Catherine offering her cheek for air kisses while her eyes remained calculating and cool. They were almost to the car when Catherine called out from the doorway, her voice cutting through the night air like a blade. "Marcus, a word before you leave. Your father and I need to discuss something with you." It will only take a moment. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he nodded, turning to Maya apologetically. I'll be right back. Wait in the car. I'll leave it unlocked so you can turn on the heat, he said, pressing his keys into her hand, his fingers lingering on hers just a moment longer than necessary. Maya sat in the Tesla with the heat running, watching her breath fog the windows despite the temperature controls, and tried not to think about how Marcus's touch had felt real, how his smiles at dinner had seemed genuine, how easy it had been to pretend they were actually together. She'd been so focused on the performance, on fooling Catherine and maintaining the story, that she'd forgotten to protect herself from the one danger she should have seen coming, the risk of confusing the fiction with reality, of starting to believe in the lie they'd constructed so carefully. 10 minutes passed, then 15, and Maya was starting to worry when Marcus finally emerged from the house, his expression thunderous, and he got in the car without a word, starting the engine and pulling out of the driveway with barely controlled aggression. What happened? Maya asked quietly, and Marcus didn't answer immediately, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white, his jaw clenched with whatever he was holding back. My mother, he finally said, his voice rough with anger, has decided that you're unsuitable, that you're clearly with me for my money, despite the fact that you literally knew nothing about my wealth when we met. She's decided that I'm making a mistake and that she's going to fix it by offering you money to disappear. The words hit Maya like a physical blow, and she felt something crack inside her chest, because of course Catherine had seen through them, of course the performance hadn't been good enough. They'd been idiots to think they could fool someone as sharp as Marcus's mother. How much? Maya asked, her voice hollow, and Marcus looked at her sharply. What? He said, and Maya repeated herself, enunciating each word carefully. How much did she offer me to leave you alone? I'm curious what she thinks I'm worth, what price tag she put on removing me from your life. Marcus pulled the car over abruptly, the Tesla jerking to a stop on the shoulder of the road, and he turned to face her fully, his expression a mix of anger and something that looked like hurt. She offered you $50,000, he said flatly. $50,000 to walk away and never contact me again, to admit that you were only interested in my money and save everyone the embarrassment of a prolonged breakup when you inevitably showed your true colors. Maya laughed, the sound bitter and sharp, because the universe had a hell of a sense of humor, offering her enough money to solve every problem in her life in exchange for ending a relationship that didn't actually exist in the first place. You should take it, Marcus said quietly, and Maya's laughter died in her throat. I'll still pay you the $4,000 I promised, but you should take her offer too. $54,000 total for one evening's work. That's more money than you'd make in a year at the diner. That's money that could change your life. He said it like he was being generous, like he was doing her a favor, and Maya felt rage bloom hot and bright in her chest, burning away the confusion and the guilt and the uncomfortable feelings she'd been trying to ignore. You want me to take your mother's money? Maya said slowly, her voice dangerously calm. You want me to prove her right, to confirm every nasty assumption she made about me being a gold digger who's only interested in your wealth. You want me to validate her prejudice and her classism by doing exactly what she expects poor people to do when offered enough money. Marcus flinched like she'd slapped him, and Maya kept going, the words pouring out like poison she'd been holding back. I came here tonight because I needed money, because my mother has medical bills we can't pay, and my landlord is threatening eviction, and I saw a chance to solve my problems the only way they ever get solved for people like me, by swallowing my pride and doing something I'm not proud of, Maya said, her voice shaking with emotion. But I'm not going to take blood money from your mother. I'm not going to give her the satisfaction of being right about me. I'm not going to confirm her belief that everyone has a price if you just offer enough.